It's NFL schedule release week, and with the schedule being released comes a million different talking points. You're going to hear ESPN saying one thing about one team's schedule, the NFL Network saying another thing about the exact same team. There's a lot to work through, and because it's May, we've got a lot to speculate on, and everybody's going to take their time to speculate. So in this episode, I'm going to go through the top 5 most common things that you will hear this week and the days to come about the NFL schedule release for each team, and try to discern whether it is a myth or whether there's truth behind these talking points. So when you hear them come up, you can have it in your mind to say, this is what I should think about this, and this is what I should think about that. I'm Adam Chernoff. Thank you for joining me for another live stream here on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. We're getting into it quicker today. You've taken the time to click on and join the live stream. I'm going to get right to the information. I'm going to keep you updated with a few things going on as well, in addition to the info that's happening. If anybody's joining in the live chat, keep your questions coming in. I'll get to them as we go. Let's start off with number 1. This is going to be everywhere. You're going to see endless references to strength of schedule. It's inevitable. You're going to hear it on every network. You're going to hear every analyst bring it up, and you're going to hear me bring it up at different times. And I think there's a lot to talk about when it comes to strength of schedule, just so you can understand when you hear it, what exactly is going on. And there's some very good and there's some very bad from this. But in general, when it comes to strength of schedule being predictive of how a team is going to fare this season, it's more myth than it is truth. And that is even more true when it comes to the most common way you hear strength of schedule referenced, and that is by average or accumulated win percentage from last year. So what you'll typically hear is you'll have an analyst on TV and say, this team in 2025 faces an opponent schedule that averaged 0.52 win percent last season. Here's the problem with this. From season to season, the average difference in winning percentage per team is just higher than 9%. And it might not sound like a lot, but when you think about an average schedule, which is used in this metric, being plus or minus 9% different this year from how teams finished last year, on that same schedule that's 0.52, you're talking about the difference between 0.43 on the low end and 0.61 on the high end. Now, that's the difference in an average opponent of about 3 wins per team. It's a massive gap. And so when you look at just how predictive this is, the signal that comes from backwards looking strength of schedule metrics that are based on win-loss records from last year to this year and trying to say this is how difficult or easy a schedule is going to be is very, very slim. There's very little signal in that. And when you hear that, you really have to kind of put a caveat on it that this is very sort of misleading in a lot of different ways. When you're trying to look backwards and judge that and say that those teams are going to be better or worse this year, there's just so much variance that goes into it. So when you hear those winning percentages for strengths of schedule reference, I don't want to say close your ears entirely, but just know that you're looking at something that is going to change a lot in the season upcoming. Now, there's a second level to this. And what a lot of places are starting to do, you don't see this as much on TV networks yet, but it's becoming more and more common to see average win total per team referenced as a strength of schedule metrics. You might have a team like, say, the Kansas City Chiefs in 2025, and their average opponent this year has a win total, which is the number posted at sportsbooks for wins and losses this year. The average opponent might have a win total of 9.1, for instance. Now, this comparatively to the win percent that looks backwards to last year is about 2.5 times more predictive, and will get you 2.5 times closer to the actual strength of schedule a team will face this upcoming season. It's a lot better to look at this than it is to look at winning percentage, but there's something to keep in mind with this as well. The average win total at close in September compared to what the team finishes at the end of the season for their actual win-losses, the difference between the win total and the actual win-loss per team is about 2.3 wins different per win total. So there's a very big gap in a lot of these numbers. And every year, those are getting tighter and tighter. You look back 6 years ago, it was about 2.6. Last year, 2.3. The gap is tightening on that, and it becomes season over season a bit of a a bit of a better predictor, as I get to a tongue twister 5 minutes into the Monday live stream. It's a much better number to look at than the win percentage from last year. So keep in mind, when you hear these two different references for strength of schedule, both come with a very wide range of outcomes. Both come with a very wide range of variance, but win totals are a better gauge and are a better factor than win percentage. A couple of reasons behind why that is. Well, one being that win totals are forward-looking. They're not relying on what happened last year. They're trying to gauge what is going to happen this year. Two, they've been open at most sports books since March, so you have a decent amount of money coming in on these win totals already. Every bet that comes in is an expression of an opinion. And so we've seen these numbers move. They've accounted for free agency. They've accounted for the draft. Opinions have been shaping these numbers to make them better numbers for the last 60 or so days, which, as we get into mid-May, becomes a better indicator. So that's really why you're looking at it. Now, how would I approach this as a bettor? I think the most important thing you can look at if you're trying to do something that's predictive, if you're trying to bet win totals, if you're trying to bet futures, think of every team on the schedule as having a high and a low range. I think that's incredibly important. As you look at a schedule, don't say, what is the win percentage or what is the average win total? Say, what is the range of these teams and what's the easiest this schedule can play and what is the hardest this team can play? And whether you use different averages for those win totals, like I said, 2 wins higher or lower, whether you look at the win percentages, 9% higher or lower, however you want to take that on, I think it's really important to think about, do these schedules have the chance to play a lot more difficult or a lot easier than they're projected? And that's the best way to look at it, and that's the best way to go about it. Number 2 that we hear, and whether it's truth or myth, is early versus late bye weeks. So does the bye come earlier or later in the season? And I wanted to find a lot of truth in this because I feel like this is a level of schedule analysis that ties more into the type of handicapping that I do, which is on the subjective side. But the fact is, this has been disproven a lot more than I ever thought. And there's a lot of myth in this. And so the first thing that stood out to me was there's a university paper from Southern Utah University that's available on Google Scholar to look at. And it was published about looking at timing of bye weeks during the season and trying to gauge whether or not it helps a team improve their chances of making the playoffs. And there were a number of seasons looked at, very detailed. It was like 30 pages, this report was. And the conclusion was, it doesn't matter when the bye week occurs during the season. It doesn't help teams improve their chances of making the playoffs. And so I read it, and I was like, that kind of puts a little bit of a damper on this idea that I had, because in my mind, I was thinking, if there's a coach that comes into a season and maybe he's a new coach, he's got a lot of new players, to me, a bye week earlier in the season would make a lot of sense, because you go through summer very quickly, you get to training camp, you get to preseason, you have all these regular season games starting right away. There's no time to break and adjust, and you're just running with everything very quickly. The bye week comes week 5, 6, 7. In my mind, I thought that was probably a good thing, because you have that chance to reset, refocus, make all of those changes very quickly. On the other side of this, in my mind, I was thinking that if you're a veteran head coach, say someone like Andy Reid, who's always having bye week success, if you're late in the season, you know you're a playoff team, you know you have a very good roster, you're maybe making those late final changes with the late bye to get everything up to speed, and then you adjust and get ready for the playoff run, and that's where you start seeing teams peak. I feel like I heard a lot of that with Belichick during his years with the Pats. I feel like I heard a lot of that with Peyton, with the Saints, with Reid. And the fact is, there's just not a lot to support this. And so the way that I went and looked at this and the way that I took it on was trying to say, okay, let's isolate these first-year head coaches with a new team and try to see, is there a difference, whether it's an early bye, week 5, 6, or 7, or if it's a late bye, which is weeks 12, 13, and 14. And I know you're kind of bucketing sample sizes on either sides of those buys, but the fact is, there's not a lot of changes. Dating back to 2014, if a first-year head coach has an early week bye, week 5, 6, 7, the performance in the games after that bye only improves the scoring differential by 0.01 points per game. It's almost no different whatsoever. And so when you look at late week buys, it gets a little bit more interesting. If a first-year head coach has a bye week in 12, 13, or 14, we see a scoring differential per game change of 4.09 points as an increase to the better. Now, here's the caveat with this. If you hear a team scoring differential improves by 4 points per game, you probably think that that's a very big leap forward. This is 10 years of data. What's really noisy in these late week buys and almost all of the teams that are connected to this increase in scoring margin per game is one thing, and that was that there was a quarterback switch made during the bye week, and that quarterback took over, and it was a change, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you have a massive improvement for a first-year head coach with a team, perhaps they were struggling up to that point to warrant the quarterback change. And then you have not only a very low floor for that quarterback to come in and change and exceed, but also you have a chance of the QB spark that exists league-wide when you make the shift and the team tends to play up to a better level. Now, this plus 4.09 number was inflated by 1 year specifically, and that was Kyle Shanahan's first year with the 49ers when he made the switch to Jimmy Garoppolo. And the team as a whole was about 10 points better per game with those Garoppolo starts in scoring margin, and that skewed the sample pretty drastically. So if you remove Shanahan from it, it's about 2.06 points per game better are these first-year coaches with the late bye when they make the quarterback shift. When there's no quarterback change, the numbers, just like the early bye, very stable, very static. Now, when we get to veteran head coaches, coaches who have been with the same team for 5 years or more, almost no change on the early buys when you're looking at scoring margin before or after, just 0.5 point per game better following the bye. When you look at the late season buys, those teams improve with a scoring margin increase of plus 2.30 points for the veteran coaches who are having the bye late in the season. So to summarize, when you hear the bye week analysis, for first-year head coaches, it doesn't really matter whether it's early or late unless there's a quarterback change. For veteran head coaches, the early bye is less desirable than the late bye, but the increase isn't that significant. As a whole, league-wide, there's very little impact from the bye week on teams improving their chances to make the playoffs. So when you hear all of this bye week analysis, this is definitely something to keep in mind. The way that I would look at it is on a team-by-team basis. Try to isolate new head coach, veteran head coach, and just think about the intent and where the team stands preseason. You kind of have to go a little bit subjective on all of this. If it's a team like the Kansas City Chiefs, it's going to face a very difficult schedule. Things are going to be very daunting, very competitive AFC West. We know Andy Reid's very good during the bye. You'd likely prefer that to be late season, knowing the playoff run is coming, and that's the focus. If you're a team like the Chicago Bears and you have Ben Johnson, and it's going to be the second most difficult schedule, a brutal home schedule, you're probably wanting that week to come a little bit earlier in the season. If you have the away games stacked early, I think you could also look at that as if you have a bunch of home games, all those difficult ones stacked early in the season, and then you have the bye week after that, you could potentially set up a bit of a upswing following that into easier games. And so again, it's not a massive factor when you're looking at it league-wide as a whole. I still believe that there's some context to be taken from it when you're looking at a team-by-team basis going through. Early season Thursday night football games. This is one that there is a lot of truth behind, especially so for first-time head coaches. So looking at weeks 2 to 8, because week 1 has the extra prep time, it's usually a celebratory game on the first Thursday night, like we're going to see this year with the Cowboys and the Eagles. However, it is Unfortunately, one of the first-time head coaches playing in that Thursday game, we see a little bit less of an impact with the week 1 game. But from weeks 2 to 8 for first-year head coaches playing in Thursday night football early in the season, this is schedule poison. We have not seen a rookie head coach since the schedule change in his first year with the new team in the new role be able to overcome and get a win on this Thursday night football game. And these teams start incredibly slow. 2-6 in the first quarter, 1-7 in the first half. Early season Thursday night football games for first-year and first-time head coaches are absolutely brutal to navigate when they come in the first half of the season. This is something that when you see the schedule drawn, the schedule release happen, you got to circle it. You got to mark it on the side. When you're looking at the year-long point spreads that get posted, it's almost never a bad decision to go through and play some of these look-ahead lines if they're available. Sportsbooks tend to post these a little bit later in the summer. This is almost it's never a bad decision, almost, to go and fade these coaches in this spot. And the thinking behind this is pretty standard. In general, these coaches, whether it's first time or veteran, view Thursday night football games as a very difficult situation to navigate and a very tough spot to overcome. You have the short week. It's short preparation. A lot that goes into this that makes it a very difficult game and schedule spot to overcome. But when you're a first-time head coach, it's the first time you're going through the adjusted week and the adjusted prep. That makes it really hard to go through and break out of the routine, especially when it's early in the season. Like you think back last year, week 3 for Gerard Mayo going to face the Jets. The Jets after week 1 and 2 looked like a disaster of a team. Pats didn't necessarily look a lot better, but then it was like both teams were on complete different sides of the spectrum when you get into that. The Jets had the rookie quarterback or the veteran head coach. They had the veteran quarterback, and they were able to navigate that so much better than Mayo from a preparation standpoint. And it just showed through the entire game. The Jets walked up and down the field and dominated the Pats, won 24-3. It's just such a difficult hurdle to overcome when you're doing it for the first time. So this is something that definitely matters. There's definitely truth to this. And as you get to the schedule release, this is definitely something you have to look at, you have to circle, and you have to take note of. Unfortunately, we might not get any of these spots this year because the one that looked very promising is going to be in week 1. Now, I didn't do any data specifically for week 1 on these first-time coaches, so that becomes a bit more of a subjective angle. I don't think it matters necessarily as much. We're going to see Schottenheimer and the Cowboys play Thursday night against the Eagles to open the season, just because you have the lead up to it, and teams approach the final week of preseason different, knowing they have that. And so that's something to watch for in August. But maybe we get lucky, and in the other 7 Thursday night football games, we'll find one of these other first-time head coaches put in this position with their team. Number 4 is standalone games. Now, we're going to hear a lot about teams that get the showcase schedule, which is likely going to be the Washington Commanders. They'll get either 5 or 6 primetime games. They're going to be put in a lot of big rivalry games. You're going to hear teams, as we look at the schedule, this team has 4 standalone games. This team has 5 standalone games. This team has 6, which has been the max. You get put in the primetime, you're getting shopped around. What stood out to me in this was that it was a lot more myth, and maybe it's not necessarily myth the right way to say to this. I think this is very much noise when it comes to these games. And the biggest reason that I would say that trying to bet over or under on win totals or be predictive about the season being noisy is a lot of this is kind of indirectly priced in. So with really the exception of the Jets last year getting a ton of primetime and standalone treatment, especially in the first 3 weeks of the season, teams put into these schedules that have 5 or 6 standalone games scheduled typically are very good teams with very high win totals to begin with. There's a reason we're not going to see the Cleveland Browns in 6 primetime games this season, and we're very likely to see the Washington Commanders in 6 primetime games this season. That's because everybody wants to watch one team because of what they did last year, and nobody wants to watch one team because of what they're expected to be this season. And so these are all, to begin with, very good teams, and they already have very high win totals. And so what we've seen in recent seasons since the schedule change is these very high win totals are very difficult to exceed to begin with. Teams that are priced in these standalone games that have 6 of them on their schedule fail to meet their win total by an average of 0.6 wins per season. But these are almost always double-digit win total teams. And these double-digit win totals are going under more often since the schedule change than they are going over. And so you can look at this and say these teams are going under their win total because they have these 6 standalone games. I look at it more as there's just a really high expectation put on these teams that's bumped up from a year ago. And they're just playing a difficult schedule to begin with because they were great last year. And that difficult schedule, combined with the increased expectations, makes it really difficult for a team who took a leap last year to take another leap this year and exceed those expectations. And so I would say the standalone schedule spot of it, I think, is more noise than not, but it ties into a bigger picture, which is it's kind of hard for these teams to exceed and get by it. Before we get to number 5, I want to remind everybody that the RAS Picks NFL service is now live for 2025. The first release of the NFL service could come as early as Thursday, May 15th. Something to keep an eye on if you want to keep up with everything going on with the service and you don't want to miss anything coming up for the season. Sign up at raspicks.com/NFL. You can see all the details. Early bird pricing is still available. Won't be for much longer. So if you want to reduce the price per pick, you want to reduce the overall cost of the service, go over to raspicks.com/NFL for all of the details. And of course, if you want to keep up with all of the offseason content beyond just the videos, live streams, and the podcast, you can head over to www.footballbetters.com. It is a free email newsletter. You can sign up for free, get all of the emails and all the offseason content delivered to your inbox, including upcoming team-by-team preview content, which, for those of you who already get the emails, in the bottom of the emails, the first time I've said this online, for the last couple of emails, I've been fishing for info. There's been a poll at the bottom. I've been seeing who's reading, who's not, with a yes-no to whether or not you want early access to the free preview guide. It's coming out. So if you're interested in that and you see the emails, you can get to the bottom. You can see the preview guide, yes, no, and you can click on that. Keep an eye for that the next time you come out. Footballbetters.com, free email newsletter to sign up. Want to say hello to Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. Also, Faduni is back enjoying a coffee for a live stream. Good to see you as well. Good morning. Pumped about Eagles, Cowboys. Ryan Roberts is in also as well, saying the Eagles -7 at DraftKings for the season opener against the Dallas Cowboys. I think that's a reasonable number to look at as well. Sky High is asking about, is there actionable data for significance about international standalone games? For a long time, there was, in how teams were forced to handle it and how they were forced to travel. Now, with it becoming so common and teams really understanding how to travel, it's becoming less impactful. I think standalone games and looking at that is a great topic and one I'll bring up on a additional video, just because it's not something that every team has and will deal with. I omitted it from this video, but the biggest factor that I'm seeing now, for the most part with these, is teams going early versus late, and also looking at some of the new fields that are coming into the rotation, the field conditions, the grass, the traction the players are getting, and how that tends to lead to more overs than unders. So you have some conditioning. This year we have another Brazil game, which we know last year was messy. We also have a game in Madrid for the first time ever. Next year is Australia. Lots of commentary about the fields, the conditions, the footing, and how that impacts totals. So Sky High, if you want to check in on a future video, we'll definitely have a breakdown. I think that's a great question, one to look at for a video as well. Crunch Time is saying RAS is definitely worth it. Great value and great content. You're promoted to the hype man of the channel, Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, perhaps de-seating Ryan Roberts as the role. I'm kidding. Both of you guys are great. I appreciate you both coming back, and I appreciate the good comment as well. Let's wrap up with number 5, rest disparity. There's a lot of truth to this. It matters. The question with rest disparity is no longer does it matter and does it have an impact? It's whether or not the sports betting market is pricing it in correctly and full enough, because there absolutely is an impact. The way to simplify this when it comes to rest disparity, because you can have, I think the max is 13 different categories to look at rest disparity. The way to simplify it and get the biggest impact, teams with a rest advantage of 3 days or more have covered the spread 54.5% of the time. They have won outright in those games 57% of the time. As the season goes on, rest disparity tends to increase and matter a little bit more. If you look at games in the final 5 weeks of the season, teams that have 3 days or more rest advantage cover the point spread 55% of the time, and they win outright 55% of the time. Break even in sports betting is 52.4%. So there's definitely a couple percentage points of an edge when you're able to identify these spots and get the number early. I will say, as I record the Simple Handicap every single day in the season and talk about every game, every point spread, every total on Apple and Spotify, when you're looking at these games specifically later in the season with the rest disparity, you see these games get bet very early. Sunday night, Monday morning, basically the window and the time frame you have to take advantage of any rest disparity angles. Again, you're looking at 2 to 3% when it's 3 games or 3 days or more rest advantage for a team, and you see these games get bet very, very quickly. Now, I tried to take this a little bit of a step further, and I tried to look at this and say, what's a bit of a different way that you can maybe approach this? And what I found was there is a little bit of a correlation to coaching tenure experience advantage when it is priced in on top of, or I shouldn't say priced in, when it is added in on top of the rest disparity advantage that may not be fully priced in. So when you have a team with a rest advantage and you have a team that has the rest advantage with a coaching experience and longer tenure advantage, those teams win at a slightly higher rate than just looking at the overall rest disparity advantage as well. I think rationale behind that could be with the extra days to prepare, when you have an experienced coaching staff, perhaps they have more time to prep and game plan specifically for that opponent. They can put in new and different quirks that team who's on the short rest and the short prep doesn't have time to counter and doesn't have time to adjust to. Perhaps there's also a scheduling spot prior for these teams that the experience from the coaching staff is able to account for a little bit more, whether that's recovery, whether that's adjustment, whether that's just a bit of a mini exhale during the mini bye that's used to kind of reset and refocus. It does show that coaching experience in these spots matters and increases that already rest disparity evident edge that exists a little bit further as well. So that's something to keep in mind as you're looking at this. The coaching experience does push this up a little bit further as well. So as we go through, strengths of schedule being predictive. If you're looking at win percentage last year being applied to this year for the opponents, 100%, I shouldn't say 100, 99% noise, very misleading, a ton of variance, a very big gap in that. If you're looking at average win totals, about 2.5 times more predictive than win percent. Still, keep in mind, very big difference and a lot of variance that comes with that. That's what you'll hear most about strength of schedule. Mostly noise, mostly myth, but win total average, much better than win percent. The ideal is trying to gauge whether or not schedules as a whole will play easier or more difficult than they're being projected to be. Early versus late week buys. Does it matter in terms of increasing chances to make playoffs? There's very little, if any, statistical evidence to show that that does. Does it matter for first-year head coaches, whether it's early or late? Overall, no, but late has been better if there is a quarterback change. For veteran head coaches, early buys, very insignificant. On the whole, late season buys tend to be a more determining factor of a team increasing play for the final few games. I think there is a lot of need to look at this on a case-by-case basis and just evaluate when the buy fits for team intent. Is this a team that has a lot of new guys trying to get better and improve and make changes? If so, I think buys earlier are better. If it's a playoff-focused team that's trying to ramp up late in the season, I think the late buy is better. But overall, very little impact. I think there's some case-by-case and team-by-team merit to looking at this. Early season Thursday night football. Schedule poison for first-time head coaches. Plain and simple. Difficult for all coaches to navigate, but the less experience the coach has, the more detrimental early season Thursday night football games are to the team. Standalone games and the count of them, very, I think, noisy. These are already very good teams to begin with being put into these games. When we're talking about teams with 5 and 6 standalone games, those win totals are hard to exceed as is. While standalone games do make things a little bit more difficult when you have the travel and you have the change in rest, I think having a rest disparity negative edge, I think dealing with playing other difficult teams on the schedule as a whole are more detrimental to these teams than just having to play at different times being labeled as an inconvenience is. And then rest disparity overall, 3 games or 3 days, I've said that twice now, 3 days or more rest disparity advantage matters. 55% win rate, 57% straight up. When you're looking overall later in the season, that increases even further as well. So yes, rest disparity is important, and that is something that you definitely have to look at when it comes to the schedule being released on Wednesday. That will do it for me today. I hope everybody has a fantastic Monday. I'll talk to you again, same time Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific. On schedule release day, we'll have more leaked games by then. We'll have more announced games by then. We'll be able to talk a little bit further. I'm going to get into time zones. I'm going to get into travel distance. And maybe even sky high, I'll be able to pull some of those international games in for the Wednesday show as we looked at some more of these common media takes and what's going to come from it. Every season, there's a team that has to fly X thousand miles. Does it matter or not? We'll look at those as well, in addition to analyzing some of the early games that come out when we know more on Wednesday morning. Check out footballbetters.com as well as raspicks.com/NFL. After you finish closing YouTube when this video ends very shortly, head over to the website, check over the early bird pricing, check out the breakdown ahead of the first potential release Thursday, May 15th. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll chat to you again Wednesday morning.